The battle lines are being drawn ahead of next month's critical meeting and vote at the International Maritime Organization on its net zero framework. The outcome of the extraordinary meeting of the IMO Marine Environment Protection Committee, or MEPC, is far from certain, and the lobbying for position is heating up. Hi, it's Marcus Hand, editor of Seatrade Maritime News, and in today's episode of the Seatrade Maritime podcast, we'll be taking a look at what's happening with the IMO's net zero framework. Perfectly illustrating the dichotomy that faces the attempt to reach consensus over a global approach for net zero for maritime were two emails that landed within a minute of each other. One from Classification Society ABS, the other from the Global Maritime Forum. The header of the ABS email was not one most would have expected. ABS chairman and CEO urges IMO to pause and rethink the net zero framework, lobbing a proverbial incendiary bomb into the discussions leading up to the extraordinary meeting of MEPC next month. The call by Christopher Vianicki for a timeout on the IMO's net zero framework was unprecedented for an industry organization of the stature which ABS holds. The press release came from the launch of the ABS 2025 Sustainability Outlook Report during London International Shipping Week, or LSIW, with Vianicki saying shipping and the IMO were on different trajectories. The report highlighted that total well-to-wake emissions from shipping continued to rise, and were now actually 121% higher than they were in 2008. Explaining ABS's position, Vianicki said, "The industry needs a framework, but we need one that marries ambition with reality. The mechanics need to be thought through. Right now, we are not where we need to be. Emissions remain 121% above the 2008 baseline. Compliance costs are compounding, and signals shaping investment, regulation, fuel pricing, penalties, availability, scalability are moving at different speeds. The IMO needs to take a time out. We need to get this right." Beyond the headline-grabbing statements, the report gives a detailed analysis of the current situation and why ABS believes that the present net zero framework up for vote at the IMO next month needs major adjustment, arguing that green fuels will take much longer to develop at scale than current timeframes allow for. There is also a strong role seen for LNG and latterly bio-LNG as a bridging fuel, with nuclear put forward as the long-term option to achieve net zero in shipping. The second email from the Global Maritime Forum was a statement by the Getting to Zero coalition from its 180-plus member shipping companies. It took the exact opposite view of ABS, calling on member states of the IMO to back its net zero measures and saying that a failure to do so risks significant consequences for the shipping industry. It warned that not adopting the framework would set back the momentum already in play for ordering of vessels capable of running on alternative fuels. The statement from Getting to Zero presaged the release of an analysis undertaken by UCL Energy Institute, the Global Maritime Forum, and climate high-level champions. In many ways, this report actually agrees with ABS that the industry is not on track when it comes to meeting climate targets. The report analyzes the aim of having at least 5 to 10% of fuel used in international shipping to come from scalable zero-emission sources by 2030. The number of scalable zero-emission fuels, or SZEF vessels on order, would only meet 37% of the needed demand by 2030. And the fuel production supply is uncertain, with a huge variation of 32 to 134% of what is required. However, the solution suggested is very different to that from ABS. Not simply does the IMO net zero framework need to be approved by member states, but negotiations ahead of the vote need to urgently require the inclusion of incentives to encourage the adopters of zero-emission fuels to promote their take-up before the framework enters force in 2027. Ahead of the extraordinary meeting in October, these two emails illustrate the gulf of opinions that still exist. There are, of course, many other opinions, and just this morning, I've seen Reuters reporting that a group of major shipping companies, including Frontline and DHT Holdings, are saying the framework needs critical amendments, including considering realistic trajectories. Meanwhile, the International Association of Ports and Harbours has called for the adoption of the net zero framework to support vital infrastructure developments. Coming back to the ABS report, it dovetails, although this is not to say they are connected, with the Trump administration's unequivocal rejection of the IMO net zero framework, which also highlighted the preclusion of LNG and biofuels. Moreover, the US also made the threat of retaliation, understood to be tariffs, on states that back next month's vote at the IMO. For many sitting in Europe, it may be hard to comprehend that climate change and the target of net zero emissions are not as important or high on the agenda in some other parts of the world. It was something that was mentioned to me earlier this year by a shipping executive who had worked in Asia for many years and then moved back to the UK. He said that the emphasis on reducing emissions from shipping is much higher than Europe than it is in, for example, where he was based in Asia. Now, what does this mean in this case? If you look at countries with export-led economies that have just gone through protracted negotiations with the Trump administration to try and keep US import tariffs as low as possible, the threat of a new round of tariffs, if they choose to support the IMO's net zero framework, would be particularly unappealing. Especially if, as may well be the case, net zero is not the hot-button issue domestically that it is for Western governments. Imagine being the politician who has to explain the country has been hit with high US tariffs, endangering jobs because they chose to back net zero emissions for an industry most people barely realize exists in the first place. It's not too hard to see how some states in this position could be strong-armed by the US into not supporting net zero measures at the IMO. And indeed, some states may not be unhappy with being able to justify not supporting net zero at the IMO, as it would add cost to their exports in terms of shipping and would be a burden for their own maritime businesses. Here, the ABS report and its stance would be very helpful, as it provides a renowned industry expert in the maritime world saying that the IMO net zero plans are out of step with the reality of developments in terms of new fuels. Coming to the responses of IMO Secretary General Arsenio Dominguez, and they seem typical of his approach when asked publicly about difficult issues. Essentially one of, it'll be all right on the night. Speaking at an LSIW event on Tuesday, Dominguez said he was confident that the framework would be approved in October. The following day, at the week's headline conference, when asked about a scenario where the measures were not passed, he simply stated, "I do not work that way." His confidence, though, is not necessarily shared by all in the industry. Even prior to recent events, going back to May this year, DNV Maritime CEO Knut Ulrik Nielsen told in a webinar, "Considering that the US withdrew from the process, I think it is still uncertain what will happen in October." A show of hands at the audience of the LSIW headline conference revealed that at most 50% thought the measures would make it through regardless. Is the Secretary General as confident as he appears? Who knows? But these coming weeks are going to be a real test of his charm and diplomatic skills. We will be keeping you updated on the latest developments on Seatrade-Maritime.com. Thank you for listening to the Seatrade Maritime podcast, and we look forward to joining you on our next episode.